This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman, Locked On analyst Jarvis Davis, and 11 Alive anchor Maria Martin. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet that wins. The Atlanta Football Party is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So which first-round rook have more pressure to perform? We'll discuss. And are you confident a particular position room has enough? We'll download on that too. Also, do Arthur and who have an issue? We'll explain. But first, let's talk about the pressure this offense is going to be under this upcoming season and if Seven's prepared to handle it. So, Maria, Bijan Robinson responded to your question earlier this week about this offense not wanting to be special, but needing to be special. So is Zach Robinson and company under any added pressure that warrants a need to perform at a high level?
You guys know how I feel about the word pressure, right? I feel like the NFL is pressure everywhere, every single time. But I think it's really interesting that Bijan answered it the way that he did, because I didn't really prompt him that way. And he said, look, it's not good enough. 6th overall in total offense is not good enough for us. You know, that is a sign to me that a guy like Bijan Robinson, who has now had a little bit of experience in the league to be able to voice those opinions, he knows that they're capable of a lot more. And they feel like, and it's probably warranted that he said this, they left a lot on the table. So I think that by Bijan just bringing that up on his own, they have pressure within themselves. Like, it's already created on that side of the ball. They know that over the last couple of years, you know, they've slowly been adding those pieces to offense. First round draft picks galore on the offensive side of the ball, to the point where we were all begging them to finally pick a defensive player. So I think that those pieces that are in place now, everything that you've seen over the last couple of years in the draft, you understand that it's got to pay off at some point, right? Like, we have to see this offense take the next step at some point. Zach Robinson, first-time play caller, first-time offensive coordinator in the NFL last year. You give him some grace there. Now you have all of these continuity pieces on that side of the ball to where, yeah, there's pressure in a way, just because they should naturally take that next step forward. We talked about giving Mike a little bit of grace, but at the same time, all the pieces around him, albeit some of the changes on the offensive line, are pretty much the same. So the pressure is, at some point, the continuity piece has continued. Y'all have to take the next step forward. Bijan knows that. He vocalized that on his own. I didn't really prompt him that way. And I just think that that tells me that there is pressure within themselves. We don't even need to give them that.
Aaron, do you feel like there's pressure there for this offense, whether that is, to Maria's point, something that they're feeling internally or something that's actually warranted, especially when you look at where the defense is and where they may need the opportunity to kind of get ramped up, where that offense would have pressure to kind of carry them, for lack of a better term, maybe early in the season?
Yeah, I think yes, to answer your question, T, like, there is pressure internally, there is pressure externally, as you said, because we don't quite know what this defense is going to be. It's going to be a young unit, and that's not typically associated with consistency or immediate impact, that you're going to need your offense to carry them, especially in that first stretch of games where you face several teams that are all playoff aspiring teams, that are, you know, potentially wanting to push for a Super Bowl, whether we're talking about Tampa Bay or Minnesota, Buffalo, San Francisco. That's the caliber of team. Washington, you know, no offense to Carolina, but in those first 6 games, like, you have these teams that are like, our goal is to win a Super Bowl this year. Yeah. And if you're the Falcons and you want to be that measuring stick against that caliber of opponent and show, hey, we're not just a team that's trying to make the playoffs, but we're also a team that can potentially make the playoffs and make some noise in January, then you have to beat those teams. And if you're expecting to beat those teams, you know, with Tampa Bay and Washington and Buffalo and San Francisco, what do those things all have in common? Minnesota, they all have potent offenses. So your offense is going to need to be able to carry the torch early in the season. As for the pressure, yes, absolutely. This offense was good last year, but it needs to be kind of great this upcoming season. You have all the pieces, as you say, with Zach Robinson going into year 2. We've seen consistently in Atlanta with the last several offensive coordinators, big jumps in year 2 from a play calling standpoint, from an offensive output standpoint. That expectation is on that. You have your young quarterback in Michael Penix, and even though he's a first-year starter, and you do, as Maria said, have to give him some grace. You're expecting this offense to really be firing on all cylinders at some point this season, even if it isn't necessarily coming out of the gates, dropping 30 points every single week in order to win those early season games. By the year's end, when you have to make up whatever ground you have to make up to make a push for the playoffs. And that's the difference between the Falcons and the Bucs the last couple of years. The Bucs finish every season strong and the Falcons fizzle at the end of the season. And so when this offense is firing on all cylinders late in the season, they have to be able to reverse that trend. And that's going to be because this offense is potentially, at that point in the season, able to score consistently 30 plus points or however many points they need to in order to win those football games down the stretch.
Yeah. 30 is probably the perfect number in what you mentioned, Aaron, because Jarvis, when you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and what they averaged, obviously they trended up as the season went on, but they averaged 29.5 points per game, and they only allowed opponents 22.5. So if you're coming out of the gates at home against that opponent, and then you're going to have to face them twice, and ultimately they're the ones you have to beat just to get out of your division. Yeah, there's probably pressure added on this offense, and for Zach Robinson to ensure that they're ready to perform at a high level immediately.
Absolutely. And because here's the thing, when you look at Terry Fontenot's draft history with this team, it's been geared towards the offense, right? This is the first time they took a defensive player and they doubled up, as a matter of fact, in the first round this year. But the previous years, it's been Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson, and Michael Penix Jr. So yeah, if you invest that much draft capital into that side of the football, yeah, it better be doggone better to be able to carry the team. Absolutely. Throughout the entire year and into the playoffs. It needs to be the catalyst for, what your goals are. And I think that is definitely to break this playoff drought that you've been in for the past 7-8 years, right? So I think that's the thing for me. Yeah, it's definitely pressure. It's definitely pressure to perform. And Chris Lindstrom even talked about being the greatest offense, and understanding that. And it was unprompted as well when he was speaking to the media earlier this week. So when you think about it from that aspect of it, yeah, these guys understand it. Zach Robinson wouldn't admit to it because I asked him talking about that pressure and carrying the team, and he said there's no pressure, in the building. But yeah, it's definitely there's a level of intensity has to be geared towards being one of the best, if not the best offense in the league, because of what you were able to bring to the table as far as that draft capital and the amount of talent that you have, and everyone sees it. It's not just you all thinking it. There are folks around the league that saying, yeah, but Bijan Robinson probably going to be that dude, for the next 5 or 6 years from a running back standpoint. So yeah, you have the weapons. So yeah, this is put up or shut up time. Like you were 13th in scoring last year, averaging about 23 points a game. That's not going to be good enough. I'm sorry. That's not going to be good enough, especially the way you open the season for that first month of the season. So, yeah, this is one of those things where, they've acknowledged it, I feel, because they wouldn't be talking this way if they didn't. And I think, just from an outside perspective, yeah, like the pressure is on and it's time to perform.
Yeah, and I think, too, we often, at least for the last 2 months, have been looking at the rookie draft class for 2025 and that kind of indicating pressure. And we'll talk about them in a little while. But ultimately speaking, what you've done the last 4 years in drafting puts a tremendous amount of pressure on that offense as well, because when are they going to ultimately come together, all the pieces of that offense, to actually be as great as people think that they can be. So, yeah, I think that there is a level of added pressure. But, of course, that level of added pressure probably, if we're being honest, starts with Bijan Robinson, because you don't want to have too much pressure and too many expectations for a guy in Michael Penix Jr. who will be QB1 from day one this season. So that may take a ramp up period. I know he had some time with Ryan Newsel as far as last year when he took over as a starter, when they were doing team 2 reps, if you will. So there's something there, but real game action means something totally different. So I think that run game might low-key have more pressure on it, because it's going to need to carry the offense that's going to carry the team. That said, Maria, when you think about Bijan specifically, what's the next step for you for him? What do you want to see that shows you, hey, this means he's handling the pressure that we expect of him on the field?
exactly what he said to us earlier this week. Explosive plays and explosive runs. That's something that he's been working on a lot this offseason. And when you look at his stats, his longest run last year was 37 yards. And you look around the league and there's a bunch of guys that he looks at, specifically Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, throw him in there, Jahmyr Gibbs as well. They've all had runs of 70 plus yards last year. And so Bijan feels that pressure of, if I'm going to go to the next level and I'm going to be that guy, I have to produce more explosive runs. And statistically, that's 10 plus yards as an explosive run. So yeah, the 37, his longest last year, that's an explosive run, but that was kind of it. And so for Bijan, he wants to take it to that next level. And I absolutely believe Bijan can get there. Now, granted, he's asked to do a lot of things within this offense. So it's not just the explosive run piece of it. And I think that's what makes Bijan so great as a running back, because he is asked to do so many things when it comes to the position. But there's something really cool happening with Bijan that I want to point out to you guys. So the first couple of years, Bijan's always had that confidence, right? That I was a running back that was supposed to be drafted where I was in the first round. He's always carried that confidence with him, but it was a little bit of a, okay, I'm new, I'm young, and still in that second year, he still kind of had that innocence, and he's the nicest guy in the world. We all know that. He's a superstar, but genuinely like the coolest, nicest person. This year, the way that he talks, it's almost like he's taking a next step in the belief in himself. I don't know what it is. I can't explain it, but I was watching him talk the other day and I thought, oh, he's on to something. Like, he truly believes he is that guy in the NFL. It's so subtle and so interesting that that's something that I've noticed, but I think that that's something that can actually unlock these explosive plays, this next level. He's talked about Saquon at length. He brings him up all the time in the offseason. Like, Saquon's the guy I look at. Saquon's the guy I talk to. He's the guy I mimic my game after, and a great person to do that. Now he's a Super Bowl champion finally in his career. I think Bijan can get there. And I think it starts with the explosive plays.
Yeah. And what about you, Aaron? It sounds like we have a Bijan that understands the assignment of every year. Yes, you want to take an incremental step forward, but this year, this might not be just incremental. There needs to be a huge step forward for what he's bringing to the table in order for this offense to explode, in order for them to really step up in the pressure-packed system and pressure-packed situations that they're going to find themselves in extremely early in this season.
Yeah, it goes back to what you're talking about, where it's like early in the season, the run game is going to be real important to keeping this offense on track, because you don't know what you're going to have with Michael Penix, and you don't know if he's going to be able to outduel some of these quarterbacks that the Falcons going to be facing in a pass first sort of thing. And the run game is going to be important, and also protecting the defense, right? We don't quite know what this defense is going to be, and if you can control the clock and play keep away, that will also benefit the defense in that regard. So the question I have for Maria, do you think, to borrow a phrase from Darnell Mooney, do you think Bijan is entering his villain era?
I kind of do. I actually do. And I love that you brought that up, because when he said that, I was like, oh, the villain era. I feel like it's, and is Bijan capable of a villain type era? I don't know.
Villain for Bijan is,
right. Yes. I think that that's the era that Bijan's entering into, whatever the definition of that looks like for the nicest guy I've ever met.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things where you kind of look at like how Saquon was able to break off those different runs, right? Those long runs. The wide receivers take pride in blocking. Not to say that Drake doesn't. Drake definitely does. Like Darnell Mooney, how is he going to be able to do that? Because that's how you get those next level guys getting up to the next level and following you downfield. And that's what the offensive line does. Chris Lister talked about this too. Like when you getting on those runs, he said it's hard not to kind of look at him and see, okay, this dude about to make this dude miss, or he saw this guy out of the corner of his eye, so he kind of shifted and kind of went another way. So it was kind of hard to kind of follow him down the field to get that extra block to kind of spring him for six. So I think that's going to be the big thing, is the offensive lineman getting downfield, not only getting the initial blocks, but getting on the field and assuming that he's going to get to past that second level to try to break one and take it to the house. So I feel with the offensive lineman and then also the wide receivers blocking downfield, that's going to be a really big key for them if they want to get those, those super explosive, as I like to refer to them as, because like Saquon and that Eagles offensive line, there's no doubt that they are the best offensive line in the league before Saquon even got there. And when you think about the physicality that they bring and the way Saquon runs, it's just a real commitment to the run game. So I feel like, even though I feel Michael Penix can be successful in the pass game, and there could be time. There are going to be times where I feel they're going to be able to lean on him to carry them when they have to throw. I think that commitment from Zach to say, "Hey, let's not get cute, let's not get pass happy, let's not try to keep up with the Joneses, and let's do what we do best, and that is establishing the run, establishing that physicality, and being able to try to get to those next levels so you can put those points on the board and, use that guy that you drafted him to be in Bijan Robinson."
Yeah, and I was thinking too, and again, no shade. So let me preface by saying that I think you were kind, because everybody talked about the wide receivers and what they need to do to block, and the O-line and what they need to do to block. It'll be interesting to see how Zach Robinson finds a way to scheme for Charlie Werner or Kyle Pitts to be able to provide that type of blocking as well, when that's a critical component of what the tight end is supposed to be able to do. So
thank you for bringing it up. Yeah. I don't want to be the bad guy every time when it comes to Kyle Pitts. So
no problem.
Supposed to be able
I'm not being the bad guy. I'm just telling the truth. Just an observation on truth.
Amen.
That said, let's talk about another group that finds themselves maybe in a pressure cooker, but which one of them has the biggest pressure, the most pressure to perform? We'll talk about that on the other side. This episode of our Atlanta football party is brought to you by FanDuel. Well, the time has actually come for the NBA Finals. I mean, I can't believe it's here. I don't know about you, but I certainly can't believe that the NBA Finals is here. It's just kind of crazy, because at the end of the day, it seemed like it took forever for it to come around, and now we are here. But let's talk about FanDuel and what that could mean for you guys if you are ready and willing to take part in what's going on with the with betting. So think about this. Are you a new customer? Could you be a new customer? Then if you are, we're heading into summertime as well, and you got $200 that you can actually put down on bonus bets. But there's always a caveat, right? And that would happen for you if your first $5 bet wins. So there's a little bit of a caveat there. Again, it's about whether or not you're able to get the first $5 bet to go. So how do you get that? Well, it's pretty simple. Just go to FanDuel.com. So if you're able to get to FanDuel.com, of course, after this Atlanta football party watch, then you can take advantage of it. Which players are going to show up in the big moments? Do you think it's SGA? You think it's Hallie? Then for you, make that bet. Get going with the official sports betting partner of the NBA by, again, going to FanDuel.com, placing your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So if you've got a read on who's heating up, who might shock the world, if it's the Pacers, why not back it up with a same game parlay? That's FanDuel.com. Place that first $5 bet, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if it wins. So we talked a lot about, in that first segment, about the offense and the kind of pressure it has on them. But I was thinking about this as well, Aaron. You could make the case that this rookie class as a whole maybe has more pressure on it. Really, not just looking at it from a position standpoint or from offense versus defense, but maybe from a rookie class. I can't think of one in recent memory that's had this much pressure on them. But that said, when you take into consideration what the defense needs, what this Falcons defense, this team needs from Jalen Walker, from James Pierce Jr., from Xavier Watts, from Billy Bowman, you can make the argument that any number of them has that exponential level of pressure. But for you, which first round rook has more pressure on them in year one? Is that James Pierce, Jalen Walker? But maybe an outside case you could make for even Watts or Bowman.
Well, yeah, I think you got to go all the way back to 2016 in that rookie class before you get another Falcons draft class that had that pressure to come in day one and contribute. That was a draft where Arthur Blank made the kind of mandate, I need 4 or 5 starters out of that draft class, and they were able to get that from that production from that group of players. And it's a similar conversation with this rookie class where you're kind of expecting all 4 of their top 4 picks. No offense, Jack Nelson, you keep doing you, but the other 4 picks in the Falcons draft are going to come in and contribute right away. And I think when you look at the 2 top first round picks, I think you're right, T. These are the 2 guys that have that pressure, but I feel like James Pierce Jr. is the one that has the more pressure. I think based off of all the things that we've heard post-draft, is like the Falcons really coveted James Pierce Jr. They really had their eye for James Pierce Jr., but they took Jalen Walker because it's like, hey, we can't pass up a safe pick like this, a good player like this, a high character player like Jalen Walker. But they really kind of went into the draft thinking that they were going to take James Pierce Jr. with that first selection. And then you couple that with their trading back into round 1 to get him. All the questions surrounding James Pierce. Was he worth the pick? Is he worth that adds pressure onto James Pierce to be the guy that performs. And when you look at, the scheme that the Falcons are implementing with this Jeff Ulbrich attacking scheme, you look at James Pierce Jr., that's the guy that really is, a perfect fit in that type of scheme. So you think he's going to be the guy that, long-term can be the sort of potential breadwinner, the alpha, the Batman in this pass rush unit, even alongside a guy like Jalen Walker, who I feel like the Falcons are basically like, we'll figure out a role for Jalen Walker and his versatility. He'll fit in when we get in. And so I think James Pierce Jr. has that added pressure at this stage to be the guy that performs because of the future first round pick, because of the scheme fit, because of all the questions that he's the pick that everybody was questioning. No one was really questioning the Jalen Walker pick. It was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But then when the Falcons went and got James Pierce, I think a lot of people had more questions, and that adds pressure to, him to live up to those expectations.
Yeah, I think that's a great call, Aaron, because normally you think, Jarvis, that it's the first pick in the first draft, in the first round of the draft overall for a team like, hey, that's where the pressure is, because this team decided that of all the players available, when it was time for you to select, you went with them. But there's a case to be made. And I think Aaron made a great case for James Pierce Jr. and why there's maybe just as much, if not more, pressure on him to perform this season. But when you look at this class, particularly the 4 on the defensive side of the ball, who for you, and that could be Pierce, that could be Walker, Watts, Bowman, who has the most pressure to deliver this season? And let me just say this. I'm going to put a caveat on it for you, Jarvis. Who has the most pressure to deliver early?
Ooh, I think it has to be James Pierce, especially when you put it like that, right? Because when you look at all of the background that they did on James Pierce Jr., because Jalen Walker was a no-brainer. That was like when I saw that Carolina was going to pick him, I'm like, yep, Falcons better take this dude. There's no way they can pass on this cat. And we know that the Falcons basically said if Jalen Walker wasn't there, they were going with Pierce. And I think that would have been a lot more pressure because there was just so many questions when it comes to the character piece and the coaches questioning his whatever, nobody's really come out and said exactly what they said. But, when you have your coach bad-mouthing players that play for them, a lot of times that's big-time red flags for certain organizations when you're talking about coming into going through the combine process and all that. So when you say you heard about them reaching out to his mama and talking to his mama, the day before the draft, it's just so much that they put into whether or not they felt comfortable taking this guy. You got to, I think the trust of this front office and them being able to evaluate talent, it comes into question. And it's going to validate it, or it's going to validate how you feel about their capabilities, or it's going to say, you know what, they're going to prove a lot of people wrong. And I think that, that's why I feel like James, he has to come in. He has to show it early. Got to show and prove early. I think Aaron and I talked about, though that defense being young and it's going to take some time for them to come along. However, those guys that you drafted in the first round, we got to see something early. It has to be a flash. We have to see it We have to see it immediately because that's all we've been hearing. Hey, this dude is fast. This dude's coming off the edge. Oh, he's gonna be able to get guys with speed, beat guys with speed from day one. All this stuff. So when you talk about all of the background work they did, all of the talking to your mama on the phone, Zoom call, all that stuff, that's why I feel like the pressure is on for Pierce. Walker, kind of expecting him to kind of figure it out because we know what he brings to the table from Kirby Smart and all that stuff, right? But Pierce, with the questions coming in the background, teams were kind of off on him. Yeah, this is going to be one of those deals where Terry Fontenot is going to be looking at explaining at the end of the season, if James Pierce Jr. don't do jack, he going to have to talk to Arthur Blank about that one because in 2026, bro, first round pick is gone.
Yeah. If there's a 2026 to speak of, if that doesn't work out with James Pierce Jr. So there's that part. But Maria, are you making it 3 for 3 with James Pierce Jr. having the most pressure, or do you see another rookie as having more pressure on him to perform?
Unfortunately, I'm going to agree. I say unfortunately because I want it to be a different conversation, but I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, and you guys laid it out really perfectly. Just given the fact that he was the second first-round pick that the Falcons took, that just adds immediate pressure to you because clearly, obviously, the Falcons did not have 2 picks in the first round, and so being able to give up some stuff for you, clearly they want you very badly, and I think it would have been, to Jarvis's point, a little bit more added pressure had he have been the first guy taken off the board. But now, just given everything that was around James, and to be honest, I've been pleasantly surprised with him so far. The sample size isn't so large, but just when it comes to the character piece, he was great with us the first time that he talked to us, and I know we'll get to know him better in the offseason. And AJ Terrell, that's his guy. Like, he went out on a limb and was like, I love this dude. I think he's awesome. And was confused when people were saying there was a character issue. Now, granted, he hasn't been around him for a very long time, but I think people can evolve and change. And 2, James was young in college. And so hopefully he has figured it out at this point. The Falcons said, look, all these things that are coming out about you and your coaches are saying this and whoever else is saying this, like, we believe in the athletic piece so much that we want to take a chance on you in the first round. You better get it together because I'm not dealing with this in the NFL. So there's pressure in that sense, I think, specifically for James, but just to be what the Falcons believe that he is. They wouldn't have taken him in the first round. He wouldn't have been their initial plan. They were assuming Jalen Walker was not going to be there when they were picking in the first round. He would have never been their initial plan had they have not given that belief that he can change the trajectory of where they're going on the defensive side of the football. They believe so highly in this guy. It started before the combine, but then the combine kind of solidified it when you see how freaking fast he is. And then you see him in person. He's long. I mean, he just jumps off the page to you. He's somebody that I think can change the way that they do things on defense, and someone I think Jeff Ulbrich is immensely excited about. So all of that being said, that is so much praise and accolades aside from the character piece that gives a pretty big piece of pressure to James that I think he invites it. I think he understands that it's there. We'll just see if he can turn into what the Falcons ultimately have told us and believe that he is.
Real quick, Aaron, if there is such a thing for the defenders in this rookie class to have the least amount of pressure, meaning there's space for that particular defender to grow this season, who would that guy be?
Well, I think it's probably Xavier Watts that has the least amount of pressure, just because, like, or at least based off my expectation of what his role is going to be. It's just like, okay, you're going to play deep and just make sure nothing gets past you. And so, like, it's not to say that that is not a pressure-filled role, as Maria said and others have said. Every role in the NFL is pressure, right? But at the same time, you have Jesse Bates doing Jesse Bates things. Billy Bowman is expected to kind of come in and be, a potential starter at that nickel cornerback spot where the Falcons have not had good production. And so there is some expectation that he's going to have to come in right away and be good in that role in order to boost that position. But, Xavier Watts is just, hey, just park back there. Don't let anything get over your head. Make a tackle or two, just cover up for, whatever Jesse Bates is doing when he's doing his cheating thing, just enable him a little bit, when he's out at 3 a.m. doing stuff and you're like, where's Jesse? It's like, oh, he's with me, that sort of thing. That's what Xavier Watts has to do. So I feel like that has, relatively speaking to what the other rookies are doing, less pressure than the other guys.
So
it would be a football party if we weren't taking a relationship example and somehow pulling it in.
So Free, basically, you want him to be the designated driver of this defense.
Yes, basically, that's what he's here to do.
I like designated driver better than I do being your cover for ill-gotten gains at 3 a.m. But Jarvis, what would you say? Who would you say is the rookie that maybe has, we'll put it in quotes, the least amount of pressure, meaning that there's some opportunity for that particular defender, we'll say, because obviously we're only focusing on defense here, but for that defender to maybe come along this season?
I will have to go with Billy Bowman because here's why. Because they signed the offer back, right? They also have told Clark Phillips that, hey, we're going to move you down inside. We're going to have you working in there. So I think that people, if you're talking about a mid to late round pick, so to speak, coming in, expected to be a starter. I mean, I understand why, because of the talent level, but I think there is still a amount of grace that you should give a guy coming in to start at that particular position, because we know how important the nickel spot is. We saw the Falcons get torched a lot in that particular spot, right? It was kind of like, hey, we're gonna line Justin Jefferson up in here, let's see if we can take advantage of this type situation. They're gonna not cover him, you know what I'm saying? Like, just let him run free through the defense. It's okay. But no, I think that's one of those things where you look at, okay, Billy Bowman, we're going to move you from safety down to nickel because of what we see on tape. We really like the aggressiveness. We really like the instinct that you have. We feel like, you can be a more of a force in run situation because you're going to be in nickel so much. Teams like to run out of that too because of the personnel look that they get. So being a safety, being able to be aggressive and understanding what that means to come down and make plays in the run game, that's going to be something that's going to benefit you. But I feel like there still has to be some sort of understanding, transition, grace given to him. And I believe that he's going to get that because there are veterans that they can put in that spot. People might not like them, but there are vets right there lined up to step right on in and play that spot until he get things figured out.
Yeah. And Maria, for you, is there in this class, the defensive class, these 4 guys, who maybe has the least amount of pressure, the guy who the Falcons have a little bit of leeway to be able to bring him along?
I'm with Aaron here. I think it's Xavier Watson, especially because he's one of those guys where the Falcons could not believe that he was available when they took him in the 3rd round because they thought that he was so much better than that. And so for him, he's just kind of like, okay, they think I'm that much better, and I probably am. I mean, I don't know if he thinks that, but I would think that if I'm him. And the production that he had in college, I think he could just be chilling a little bit. Billy is really undersized, in my opinion. And so I think there's an added pressure for him to succeed in the NFL. And also now this will be the 3rd change that he's had at a position. He started as wide receiver, which is exactly what Xavier Watts did as well. And then now they're moving him around again. I mean, this dude's changed quite a few times in a very small period of time. Not saying it's not possible, not saying I don't think he's great, but that's just a lot in a small amount of time for him to be moving around. And I'm telling you, when I saw him out there at OTAs, I thought that his size was going to be the biggest issue for him. Now, hopefully that's not true. Hopefully he can use that to his advantage in certain situations. But I think what the Falcons are going to be asking him specifically to do on defense puts a little bit of an added pressure because they've had such a gap at that position. And so it is really hard for him to be able to come in, be an effective starter, be everything that some people are trying to say he will be. So that's the pressure for him. Xavier Watts, I agree. He's chilling. I don't want to call him the DD, but he's good. I think he's going to have a good rookie year of minimal pressure.
Well, there is another room out there where we're wondering, are we confident that position group, we're confident about this rookie class being enough, but what about this position group? We'll unpack that and next up. So when Troy Anderson went down last year, I think it really exposed the lack of depth the Falcons had at linebacker. So for you, Jarvis, the Falcons go out, they get Divine Deablo in the offseason, but does bringing in a guy like that maybe help to solidify this group for you?
It solidifies it from a depth standpoint, and we'll see whether or not from a production standpoint it'll solidify it, because if he's able to come in and be just play all 17 games. That'll give me ease, right? Because he's been fairly healthy when he was with the Raiders. The only injuries he's had is a concussion and a sprained ankle, and that was back in 23 and 22 respectively. So when you look at it from that standpoint, he's a guy that stays on the field for the most part, and that's all I ask for. Can you just be on the field, bro? Because Troy, like at this point in his career, I can't count on him to be there. I can't count on him to be there on a consistent basis. And the best ability is the availability, right? And he just hasn't been able to live up to that. So yeah, from that standpoint, Deablo brings stability. And if he can bring some production with that as well, oh my gosh, I can see Caden Ellis and Divine Deablo in that nickel, spot, right? Because those are the type of guys that Jeff Ulbrich wants in those spots. Guys can run and hit. And also potentially from Caden Ellis' standpoint, go in there and rush for you and bring those pressures and be able to play a little man coverage and be sticky, on that second level. So yeah, I think the Divine signing really kind of opened up my eyes a little bit more to what I was thinking the Falcons were headed towards, excuse me. So when it comes to Troy Anderson's future with this team. So yeah, it made a lot of sense for them to bring in a guy like that, because I feel just from being available game in and game out, yeah, this solidified it for me.
And so Aaron, we know that it was going to be interesting to see what Jarvis's feedback was in responding to a question that started off with Troy Anderson. So
I thought he handled that so much better than I thought he was going to. I was ready for something crazy. Good job.
I give him the world of credit.
What is going on here?
You hate Troy Anderson. That's what's going on.
I don't hate Troy. Why would I hate Troy Anderson?
You've got beef.
Have him in the second round
for starters.
He's a hell of an athlete.
But we always use the relationship analogy. So I'll use one here. If you're a good boyfriend or girlfriend, but your ass never around, then are you really that good? I mean, because what you do when you're available, but you're not that available, I mean, doesn't that make you not that good of a partner? Just saying. So that said, Maria, who has a good partner who's around. So we are so not going to go in on Coach Brown.
He's a text buddy. Since we go in relationships, he's a text buddy. Hey, big head,
Ooh,
not my husband, to be clear. Not my husband.
Not Coach Brown. This is not a reference.
Ill-timed, Jarvis.
At all. No, not a dig. Nor is it a dig to the one amazing Dr. Davis. No dig to her either. Just so we're saying. And whomever is going to be Mrs. Freed, no dig to her either. So whenever she pulls up, just saying. We're just talking in generalities about your availability being your best ability. And part of that is important as it relates to depth. So when you think about bringing in a guy like Deablo from a depth perspective, Maria, like how do you feel, Aaron? How do you feel about him at least adding to the depth? Should you have a situation yet again, whether that's Troy Anderson or someone else in that linebacker core that just doesn't give you all 17 games?
I think this was one of the more flown under the radar signings for the Falcons, especially because we're talking about Troy Anderson. And I'm joking. I know Jarvis doesn't hate Troy Anderson, but there's beef there because he's simply never on the field. I mean, during his time with the Falcons, it's really tough because he's somebody who we were all so stoked about, right? And to Jarvis's point too, all believe that he's an incredible athlete. It's just there's not a big enough sample size to really solidify that statement anymore because he's just not healthy. And then you have a guy like Caden Ellis, who if you put him on a Super Bowl team, he is like one of the most, I believe he would be one of the most talked about players in the NFL. But because he is on the Falcons, he doesn't get as much credit as he probably deserves. And Caden stays healthy. He's reliable tenfold. Divine Deablo is another guy like that. And Divine is a completely different body type than Troy Anderson. He's somebody who can be very fast. He moves sideline to sideline very well. He's got a lot of proven ability in the NFL at this point, and no one really talked about it when he was signed by the Falcons. And I was like, wait, this is sneaky a very good signing because you needed that reliability at the linebacker position, given what's happened the last couple of years. And then, of course, the departure of Nate Landman. You had to fill the gap. You had to figure out where that was going to come from. Divine's fantastic, in my opinion. And I think that can only help a linebacker core who at many times over the last couple of years, we're thinking this is a rotating cast of people. I'm not talking to you, Caden Ellis. Otherwise, it was people who were hurt, people who were trying to step up for others. Divine gives you a consistency that I think can actually really, really help the linebackers. I'm excited about that group this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I was on Locked On Panthers not too long ago talking with Julian Council, and he was asking me about the Falcons offseason, and he asked me sort of which free agent signing do you think, is the most impactful? And I basically said Divine Deablo.
Let's go.
For the reasons that Maria and Jarvis are talking about, just because we've been talking about this with Troy Anderson the last couple of years, and Jarvis nailed it with, the lack of availability. We've seen a flash of Troy Anderson, and had he been able to play 30 plus games over the last 2 seasons, maybe those flashes would have grown into something consistent. But we all know that you can't develop from the bench, you can't develop from the training room, and that's really where Troy Anderson has been the last 2 seasons. And I think with Divine Deablo, he brings a lot of similarities to Troy Anderson, both being guys that didn't fully play linebacker in college. Troy Anderson was a part-time linebacker, but also played quarterback and running back. Divine Deablo was a safety that made that conversion. Similar athletes in terms of height, weight, speed type of guys that you're just wanting to develop. And I think you can kind of look at Divine Deablo as the fully developed version of what we thought Troy Anderson could be potentially, and sort of bringing that impact to the Falcons defense that the Falcons have been searching. That coverage guy that can sort of do all the coverage things that allows Caden Ellis to be put in what he does best, which is, attack the quarterback, play downhill. And you're hoping that Divine Deablo can bring that. As Jarvis said, you bring in some stability. You have a player that has had a couple of injury issues, as Jarvis laid out, but nothing to the degree of we've seen with Troy Anderson. He misses a game here or there, but because now you have potentially Troy Anderson as a backup option, and maybe this year is the first year that we can say he's going to be healthy. He can fill in if Divine Deablo misses a game or two. You have a second-year J.D. Bertrand, right? And you're expecting him to kind of make a jump, being that Captain America, as Raheem Morris called him last year, in terms of being able to add that depth. And you saw flashes of him when he was forced into the lineup late last season. So I think overall this linebacker group, with the addition of Divine Deablo, adds a lot more stability there that the Falcons just haven't had the last couple of years. And so I think for that reason, Deablo has the potential to really have an impact if the Falcons can get steady, stable play from this linebacker core that has flash potential to be one of the good ones. As Maria said, Caden Ellis has been very, very good for the Falcons the last 2 seasons. And that, as she said, that if the Falcons were a more successful team, he'd probably be more talked about as one of the top linebackers in the NFL. And if you can get that, due to not having that revolving door at the other spot that the Falcons have had the last couple of years, thanks to the addition of Divine Deablo, that could be a huge boost for this Falcons defense.
And Jarvis, we were talking as well about the core principle of this conversation is depth. So yes, Divine Deablo brings some of that, but it sounds to me like we're also saying, hey, there might need to be a little bit more depth, however that happens. But what needs to happen for you to feel fully confident? Because I don't know if I heard us feel fully confident, even with the addition of Divine Deablo. What helps you to feel fully confident about the depth of this linebacker core, not only as it relates to their ability to stay on the field, but to deliver when they're actually on the field?
Hopefully the defensive coordinator isn't Jimmy Lake, right? And I assume that Jeff Ulbrich is going to be a lot better than what he brought to the table, because putting guys in positions to succeed is the number one job, number one thing on that. When you talk about a job description as a defensive coordinator or offensive coordinator, what have you, like that's the number one thing. Put the talent that you have on your roster. Can you maximize each player as an individual to come together and have success as a one unit? So that for me is what Jeff Ulbrich is going to have to bring to the table, because like talking about Caden Ellis and being on another team and that wins more. If Jimmy Lake would have just used his dude in pass rush situations more, he may have had a job. So I'm kind of glad that he didn't use him like he was supposed to. So, and when you have a guy who's better downhill, who's a guy that rushes the passer that well, in that nickel spot, you only got 2 of them. So the other guy got to be able to cover. And having J.D. Bertrand in coverage is not necessarily my cup of tea, what I want to watch when it comes to that defense having some success. So, yeah, with Divine Deablo coming in and being that coverage guy, 6'3 3/4 and 6'4, and all that stuff, yeah, he looks the part, right? In a modern-day linebacker, a guy who can go run and hit. If I bring use a Dan Quinn euphemism. So, for me, that's what's going to bring that stability. That's going to bring that confidence that Jeff Ulbrich is going to use these guys in the right way consistently throughout the season so they can have success as a unit.
Yeah. And Marie, you kind of alluded to it, but just kind of going back to who could be that guy, and maybe it's from a performance perspective, maybe it's from an availability perspective, but who in addition could be that guy to make you just a little bit more confident that, hey, this is actually a well-rounded out linebacker core.
Well, it's funny. When Jarvis was talking, I just kept thinking about last year before the season. So like summer, training camp, the linebackers, specifically the inside linebackers, were all we could talk about. Everybody was so obsessed with the idea that they were going to be the group to watch in 2024.
The ones we weren't concerned about. You're right.
Remember, we're all like, oh, full send, they're fine. Nobody needs to think about them. And then all of a sudden, it's, a couple games into the season, if that, and everyone's like, maybe we were really wrong. And honestly, I think a lot of it is the availability piece. When you're talking about best availability is availability. Troy Anderson just not being there, just put that extra caveat on it to where, how the heck are we going to manage this the rest of the season? I laugh at the defensive coordinator piece, but I think that having a guy like Jeff Ulbrich, who, by the way, knows the position inside and out, can really help you. So I don't know if it's one specific guy. I really do believe that this defensive coordinator change, specifically with someone who's obsessed with the inside linebacker position, can really pay dividends. And again, I think it's going to be the Caden Ellis show, the guy, freak of nature. He had 5 sacks last year. And you look at all the other linebackers and what they were able to do, not as much in terms of productivity, Caden Ellis comparatively between the rest of them. But I would say it would be the Caden Ellis show. He would be like my number one in that group. And then how everyone else falls in the pecking order, that's to be determined. But I really do think Jeff Ulbrich is really, so to take a different approach to your question, if you're going to ask me about one guy, I think it's Jeff Ulbrich might be the missing piece for this linebacker group.
No, that's cool because one of my friends always says for this organization we work for that shall remain nameless or volunteer for, wrong man for the job, which means that we can never get done what we need to get done because the head of it just doesn't know what the hell he's doing or she's doing. So in this case, I mean, you could make the case that it's not so much who's in the linebacker room versus who's leading the linebacker room from the sidelines in Jeff Ulbrich.
Yeah, Jarvis may not hate Troy Anderson, but clearly he feels some type of way about Jimmy Lake. I think with the new, you talk about Jeff Ulbrich, and for those not picking up what Marie is putting out, Jeff Ulbrich played linebacker in the NFL. You have Mike Rutenberg, affectionately called Rudy, also a linebacker coach as their passing game coordinator. So the highest levels of decision makers and play callers and whatnot, game planners for this Falcons defense are linebackers in terms of what they do. And so you expect those guys to be able to get the most out of this group of players moving forward.
Indeed. So shots fired. Hell with the silencer, maybe. Do Arthur and who have an issue? We'll explain next. So, Free, sometimes it's what is said, sometimes it's what's not said. And I got to tell you, this little podcast that we got with Julio Jones, Righty White, and Harry Douglas is the gift that keeps on giving. So during that podcast, there was some conversation about what did, or in this case, didn't happen for Julio Jones, who says to this day, he still has never rewatched Super Bowl 51. And who could blame him? And I don't think it's just about the loss, by the way. I think it's more about how he was utilized in that game. 4 targets in the Super Bowl. That's insane, is what not just former players are saying. Hell, when I heard it, I had to actually go look back at the stats because in my mind, somehow Julio was so much more utilized, so much bigger in that game than he actually was. But then there was a little bit of, commentary and comments about Arthur Blank, and it was kind of like crickets. So I don't know. You think there's something there? Arthur Blank's maybe ducking Julio Jones?
Yeah, I mean, we've been hearing through the grapevine for quite some time since Julio's departure that him and the organization left not so well terms, I guess you could say. I don't know how to say that word. And on good terms. And then when Julio retired earlier this offseason, you know, he shouted out several people within the Falcons organizations and teammates and did not shout out the ownership. And it was like, I think there's a you know, you smell it? Is it smoke? Is that smoke? I feel like there's a little bit of fire there. And then sort of to hear him on this podcast elaborate a little bit more on sort of how that relationship with Arthur Blank, the Falcons owner, kind of deteriorated towards the end. And, you know, it's led to lots of, you know, questions, and people are like, oh, when Julio retires, he'll be a Ring of Honor player. And now the Falcons give away number 11 to Jalen Walker. And it's like, you know, I think eventually, you know, Julio and the Atlanta Falcons organization will mend fences, but it's not going to happen anytime soon, I think. And this is kind of putting words on that. And as for the Super Bowl piece, you know, Julio only had 4 targets, but he made the most of those 4 targets. And I guess for me, the way I would push back against this notion of like, oh, Julio only got 4 targets, that's terrible. Like, the Falcons had 2 weeks to game plan for that game, right? Like, did the players not know the game plan, what was going to be? Like, Bill Belichick was going to put everything in his power. This is what he does, which is, I'm going to take away your number 1 weapon and I'm going to make you play left-handed. And you knew, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, they had 2 weeks to know that, like, this is what was going to happen. You were not going to be the guy that the offense ran through, because the New England Patriots, the best defensive mind in NFL history, the guy that had done it so many times, which is why he's had so many rings. And, you know, anytime he goes into a room with his Super Bowl rings, you know, everybody's blinded by all the bling and whatnot, because he's so good at doing that. And so for me, like, again, obviously I am not Julio Jones, but I would sit here and go, like, I got 4 targets. I got mine. I made the greatest defensive coach, you know, sweat himself, because I made the greatest catch in Super Bowl history. And unfortunately, things didn't go quite the way that we wanted it after that catch. But, like, Julio did exactly what I think he should have expected him to do, and beyond what he was expected to do in that game. So, you know, again, he has every right to feel some type of way about, you know, his usage in that game. But I just kind of look at him like, my guy, you went above and beyond what anybody thought you could possibly do, or what anybody else could have possibly done in those circumstances. I don't think you should feel like somehow you were underutilized in that game. That's just my personal opinion.
And I think it's a very difficult thing, because I think when you look at, to your point, how players feel about how they were or weren't used in the game, I think that's where the challenge kind of comes in. Because, yeah, you could certainly look at it like in the positive, like, hey, I actually got 4 targets, right? But then on the flip side, you look at situations like, and my mind actually goes back to Walter Payton, and even to some point Saquon Barkley. Like, that was the one thing that everybody was critical of for the Chicago Bears. How do you not get Walter Payton in the end zone? How do you not get Walter Payton in the end zone? How do you not get Saquon in the end zone? So I think from that perspective, it kind of is a little bit, but it's probably saltier for Julio, because in the case of Saquon and Peyton, well, they actually got to hoist a trophy. So there's that. So I think the fact that you've not looked at that Super Bowl since you played it, Jarvis, the targets and losing all kind of make it to me, it's the losing that makes the lack of targets even tougher to deal with. Because, hey, if you got 4 targets in a win, are we having this conversation? Not as much.
I don't think we're having this conversation at all if they win, because, like, you even this in watching the podcast, you talked about Harry was walking around at his Super Bowl party with Julio Jones jersey on, acting a straight up nut. Everybody was talking about what they were going to do after the game. And I've told this story several times, what was about to go down if the Falcons would have won that Super Bowl. You know, there would have been a very special party going down in the city that I would have been at. And I had permission from Dr. Davis to go there as well. You know what I'm saying? So, this is what the thing is about. Like, and I get Julio. I understand, because, you know, at my school, you know what I'm saying? We at Albany State, we experienced a little 28-3 type stuff too. You know what I'm saying? Like we were up 20-3, as a matter of fact, at halftime against the eventual, national champions in Division Twos. And we lost the game. And I still haven't watched that game to this day. And that was over 21 years ago. So yeah, I get it. I totally understand why. But I think overall, though, I feel like this organization has an issue with dealing with their guys, right? Players that they deem their guys, right? Because Roddy White had a similar situation, with whole Kyle Shanahan being a Richard and treating him the wrong way, as he was going towards the end of his career. Yeah, there's always two sides, right? We understand that. And then you have Julio leading up to the trade, right? Arthur Blank said they were going to meet. They were trying to figure out how to meet, see what was going on before they even hired anyone to replace Dan Quinn after they fired him. So it kind of puts everything in perspective when you hear it from the horse's mouth, right? From both of them, right? When you say, hey, I ain't like how things ended. Both of them saying they didn't like how things ended. And you're talking about probably the best talents, that this organization has seen ever. And both of them were treated similarly. I mean, we got to listen. You can get mad all you want. Oh, Julio, you paid all this money. They re-upped your contract, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, they didn't treat them right. They didn't say, come to them as men and say, hey, man, you're coming towards the end. We love you, but here's how we're going to go out, or Julio, we're going to part ways with you because we feel like we have no other choice but to hit a reset button on this thing. And Julio said it himself. He's like, yeah, man, I would have understood that. I would have respected that. But you didn't even want to have a conversation with me. So yeah, I get where Julio is coming from all the way through. So And I hope that the Falcons are able to figure out a way. Julio said he's good. So I don't know if they ever will get this thing situated, because from Julio's perspective, it seems like he's done with these guys. I hope not, because that would not be cool with me. But, I think there is a matter of either Arthur Blank. I feel like Arthur Blank is the only one to probably get this right by saying, hey, man, I saw what happened, what you said on the podcast. Can we have that conversation now? Or if you're not ready, whenever you're ready, I would love to have that conversation, so we can kind of do right by you, so to speak. I know we can't get you a Super Bowl ring. I know we can't, pay you $50 more million, but can we at least have this conversation? Because I loved you as a player. I said you were going to be a Falcon for life at some point. So yeah, let me try to make good on that.
Yeah, and I think right now it's still so fresh. So yeah, it may be a couple of years before we see that reconciliation. There may be multiple steps before we see Julio go into the Ring of Honor and all is well and all is love. But if with all the controversy surrounding Michael Vick, somehow, some way, this organization could reconcile with him, Maria, I'm gonna assume that although there may be some shots fired with a silencer from time to time in that podcast so far, ultimately they'll find a way to make amends and honor Julio the way he should be honored as a Falcon, but also that the Falcons will be honored as the organization that thought enough to draft him.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that's going to happen at some point. There's nothing that leads me to believe that they won't. You're mentioning Michael Vick. He was literally at practice the other day. Like, all of those things were able to be put to the side. And granted, Michael Vick paid his penance and did his due diligence after everything that went down in his personal life, aside from with the organization. I mean, he did his time. And so I think that the Falcons honoring that and understanding that Vic was literally single-handedly somebody that changed how we view the quarterback position. And you cannot ignore that. And so I think that the Falcons doing that means 100% they're going to be able to rectify the situation with Julio. And for Julio, you can tell, I mean, the way that he talks, it's emotional for Julio. So many times Julio has said, I'm a Falcon for life. He loved being here. And, there were all of those reports where maybe he didn't practice as much as the staff would have liked him to, especially earlier in his career. That was kind of like a double-edged sword for all parties involved. Again, there's always two sides to every story. I'm kind of with Aaron in the Super Bowl piece of like, the 4 targets would never be talked about if that catch that we're all remembering, they win the Super Bowl. You'd forget that he was only targeted 4 times, because still, that's one of the more memorable catches that we've ever seen in a Super Bowl, right? It's just the emotion piece that's tied with it to Julio emphasizes, I was only targeted 4 times, because so many other things have happened. He remembers it in a different way, as I think other people would. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I totally get it. I understand his frustration. Arthur Blank makes him the highest paid wide receiver in 2019. And Arthur Blank verbalized that wasn't enough for who. So clearly, like, there was a divide before 2019. Like the relationship was already deteriorating in a way. Arthur Blank thinks making him the highest paid receiver is going to fix all of whatever's going on. Clearly that was not the case. And we've seen this play out with Matt Ryan and his departure and the way that went down. We were all saying that was so wrong, the way that they did him, and that should have never happened. And then he's like,
there's a trend here.
Yeah. And then he's like,
this is a trend.
He's an Indianapolis Colt for like 5 seconds, ? Like, we're never going to remember that happened in the full breadth of Matt's career.
On purpose.
Right. And I'm not saying that NFL owners and coaches owe players anything, because as we all know, this is a business that truly is so cutthroat and so awful in so many ways when it comes to loyalty and all of that. Like, they're all very well aware of that. However, I do believe that there has been a couple of instances in recent memory and recent history. Julio's obviously just like putting this at the forefront with the podcast, that some of the best players to walk through this building, their exit wasn't anything that anybody imagined. And I think when you put it that way for Julio and the emotion piece is still tied to it, there's going to be a lot of eyebrow raising moments when Julio's talking about his time with the Falcons. And I hope they get past that. I don't know what happened with the meeting. I know he said he tried to schedule the meetings with AB and it never worked. They were always crossing paths and they couldn't get in the building, whatever. I have no idea. But what I do know is that a conversation has to be had eventually. Julio is one of the greatest athletes to ever walk through that building, and that should be honored. Yeah. He is a Hall of Famer.
Yes.
He will be a Hall of Famer. Yeah. And to be fair, all of the, he didn't practice as much, whatever. Julio was one of the most professional and kind people I've ever covered, truly. Because even if, and I was covering them at the beginning in 2019 was my first season, that team was bad. Okay. And there was a time where all players would leave. They would see us come in the locker room and they would ditch and they would go, come over. Which, to be fair, I get it. How many ways can you explain we're struggling and we're bad? Like, I get it. That must seriously suck. Like, I understand the player piece of that. Julio, I don't care how long you had to wait. You may have to wait a minute, which is fine because he would always shower and dress before he came out. He would be there and he would talk to the media. And he was so professional every single time. And so I think it's going to get fixed. I understand the emotions from Julio, but I'm glad that he's airing his grievances. Maybe this is like a therapy session for Julio that he needs. But it's unfortunate because when you think of Julio Jones, you don't think about his time in Nashville. You think about his time in Atlanta. You don't think about anything else with Julio. You think Hall of Fame and you think his time in the A. And I hope that that's all we think about moving forward.
Yeah. Is Grady Jarrett going to be the next one that we're talking about? How it ended?
But no, Aaron is no, that is such a great call, Aaron. Wait, low key, many players have said, and this is no affront to Arthur Blank, but there have been a lot of players whom I've spoken to who said there are levels to it. So even like the other key piece of that component is if you were a Falcon who played during the Arthur Blank era as an owner, but maybe you were there before he got there. There were years where those players, that group of players, they weren't exactly welcomed in Flowery Branch as well.
It felt like they weren't even acknowledged,
Acknowledged. Exactly. Yeah. This is real. Exactly. So you know of whom I reference, several of them. And I think that you got to be careful too for moving forward, because again, this is still a place that you're trying to make a destination for free agents. So if free agents are calling their boys and saying, hey, man, how did it play out for you? How did it end there for you? So on and so forth. Players want to know that they're being taken care of. Now, the good thing is you do have a Jesse Bates III. You have a Caden Ellis, those players who are currently on with the Falcons to be able to speak of that. But the Falcons don't need any more black eyes. And this kind of reminds you of this black eye that we've seen happen a couple of times to the greatest of the greats to ever play for this team. And like Aaron said, man, it's been quiet. It's been quiet. We have not heard from 97 about any like dust ups on the departure, but we'll be waiting to see how it plays out. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked on Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen. And check out Maria Martin, host of Sports Extra on Sundays on 11 Alive. And you can catch Jarvis as a frequent contributor for Locked on Falcons and Sports Extra. See you next time.